meetings. There are no decisions that'll be made, but the public meeting will give people an opportunity to make comments or ask questions up to 5 minutes on each of those two files. So I'll get started with reading the Gospel according to the Planning Act. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning and Development. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be open to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting and comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. The business practice has been in place for a number of years and is received by the applicants as efficient customer service and effective use of committee time. Please note that staff use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to planning and development staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to the planning committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will consider the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. The committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. Make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaws passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So we'll get started with our first presentation tonight, which is 227, 227 Brock Street. I'm sorry, it's 168 Division. I've got the wrong file in front of me. Yeah. Yeah, it's 168 Division and 227 Brock Street. I was only half wrong.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Wortman, and I'm a planner with IBI Group. I'll be presenting tonight's application, which relates to two municipal addresses, 168 Division Street and 227 Brock Street, for a zoning bylaw amendment. And I'll be presenting on behalf of High Point Management, Inc. this evening. We're requesting a zoning bylaw amendment in order to permit a 6-story mixed-use building at 168 Division Street. And the related property relates to the off-site parking that will be provided for this development. So sort of think of 168 Division Street as the primary development, and then 227 Brock Street relates to a reduced parking ratio at that site, as well as parking dimensions related to the off-site parking for the primary aspect of the project. In terms of location, 168 Division Street is located just in the hub near at the intersection of Garrett Street and Division Street, whereas Brock Street's about 460 meters down Brock, next to the Chown parking garage. So for the presentation, I'll be speaking first to 168 Division Street and the relief that we're requesting there, and then at the end of the presentation, I'll be addressing 227 Brock. 168 is already developed. There's an existing 2-story building there. There's commercial at grade, and there are 6 residential units in that building currently. In terms of the surrounding buildings, there's kind of a mishmash of things there. In terms of sort of more sensitive residential uses, there are some to the rear of the property along Brock Street. I'm not sure if you can really see my cursor there, but along Brock Street, and then immediately next to the property to the west is a commercial development called the Brooklyn right now, and then beyond that is low-rise residential, and then everything sort of along Division Street and in the hub area is commercial. Just north of the property, you sort of get the rear of the Princess Street facing commercial uses, so there's kind of a parking lot and the rear of a large commercial building there. In the vicinity, you've also got Princess Towers, as well as Brock Towers. In terms of what's being proposed, we did have a lot of back and forth with staff before the submission, and we have received some preliminary comments, which we have been diligently working to address to sort of present a revised design tonight. So what we'll be presenting in the images this evening may be different than you've seen uploaded to Dash currently. In terms of the proposal, it will be 6 stories, mixed use, 35 residential units, a mix of 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms. The breakdown provided there on the screen. There are commercial uses proposed at grade, focused along the Division Street frontage and then the front part of Garrett Street. We are proposing 19 parking spaces, which would be a 0.49 ratio for the residential, and 1 space per 150 meters squared on the commercial. 5 spaces are proposed to be provided off-site at the 227 Brock location, as mentioned. There are 36 bicycle parking spaces proposed. We're also proposing 10 meters squared per unit amenity space. We've incorporated a loading space with access off of Garrett Street. So getting into some of the details of the design, as you can see, it's kind of an irregularly shaped site, and we are trying to maximize the potential of it. We have, there's sort of 2 sort of components to the building. I've highlighted the area that will be 6 stories, and then the portion at the rear closer to the residential uses on Brock Street is limited to 2 stories. With the parking being provided at grade and enclosed, and then the outdoor amenity space provided on top. The ground floor kind of provides you an idea of how the site will function from the street and for the users of the site. So we've got Division Street along here with the big retail space around the corner. There is a little area at the front, which is intended to have sort of a patio area to help create active uses there. The primary residential entrance will be located along Garrett Street at the side at a separate entrance. We haven't quite worked out the details of where all the commercial entrances will be because we're not quite at the detailed design stage, but the arrows kind of give you an indicator of where those could be, depending how the space is broken up. Off of Garrett Street is where vehicular access to the building will be provided, and into the parking area down below here. We've also got bicycle parking in here, and it is, I have an image I can try and show you later of a sort of a stacked bicycle parking system that the architect has found, where the bikes kind of pull down and stack on top of each other. We've also got a loading space incorporated to help with move in, move out, as well as garbage and other deliveries associated with the retail space. What else? And then we've also got a designated garbage and recycling room there for the tenants of the building, including both the commercial and residential, and it is intended that it would be serviced by private garbage collection. I'll kind of briefly show you some of the images and then talk a little bit more about some of the urban design features that we've incorporated. So these are sort of the elevations that you would see from the various angles. You will notice that this one wall in the south elevation is obviously very, very blank. That's the building that would be immediately abutting something on Division Street, with the intention being that hopefully when this site gets developed, that will spur further development on Division Street, and with a 0-yard setback, something would be built there in the future. Here's some more pretty renderings that the architect has prepared for us to give you some idea of what you'd be seeing at the streetscape. At the corner here of Division and Garrett, obviously there's an architectural feature kind of incorporated to draw attention and really accentuate the corner of the building. And then the 4.9 meter at grade level at grade. The renderings don't always show sort of what the coloring that the materials are intended to be, so the architect has uploaded a slide that shows what is intended to be used. I know some of those images are kind of coming across as the burnt orange, whereas it's supposed to be sort of a clay red, but it would be gray charcoal brick is the thought, and then gray siding, as well as gray architectural panels, and the red architectural panels, and then black window frames and doors. So we will be working through those at the time of site plan, but I know everyone's curious to always see what they look like now. So as I mentioned, I'll kind of go through some of the urban design features to help understand the project and sort of the thoughts that went into how it was designed. So we have, as I mentioned, there's sort of the more sensitive land uses are located further along Garrett Street, and the houses backing onto the site along Brock Street, which I've identified as residential. So on Garrett, we've got the Brooklyn providing separation and providing a transition to those low-rise uses, and then on the Brock Street side, that's where we've prioritized, and we've done a 10.3 meter setback to help minimize any adverse impacts to those sensitive land uses. In terms of the height along Division Street, if you're familiar with the area, you know, it's kind of a mishmash of uses there, but it's certainly not what we would refer to as the highest and best use of these properties, and the hope is that these uses are on a major arterial and in a corridor, and that over time they will transition to, there'll be some redevelopment in this area. So we've kept that in mind sort of when we've made this proposal. Sort of given the limitations of this site, and again, prioritizing where we put that setback, we obviously have tried to incorporate certain design features and materials to help maintain the human scale of the building. In terms of the massing, the building, we have worked with staff and gotten some feedback and tried to incorporate as much articulation of the street wall on Garrett Street as possible. We've added, you can see where the inset balconies are with the arrows. Those are where the building will be set back to create the illusion of multiple facades. We've added the balconies to help create visual interest and to provide amenity space. And as I mentioned, we've still got this architectural feature on the corner. At grade, we do have the increased ground floor height, as well as the active uses proposed on the corner. And then we'll have the defined entrances for the commercial and residential uses. And then we are proposing high quality materials with the brick proposed at grade. In terms of the policy elements, the site is designated Main Street commercial in the official plan. Commercial uses are permitted at grade with residential above, which is what is proposed. And parking is encouraged to be enclosed or off-site within this designation, which we have also incorporated. In terms of, it also does meet the high-density residential tests in that it's located in a corridor in proximity to commercial on a transit route as well as close to Victoria Park. So as mentioned, it is in a corridor on Schedule 2 of the official plan. And in general, we're the opinion it's compatible with the adjacent uses. I spoke of how we tried to step back from the sensitive uses in the area. It's not anticipated to create adverse effects. We have completed a number of technical studies, including noise, shadowing, parking, storm and servicing, as well as an urban design study. And we have worked hard in the preliminary with staff in order to design the site to be functional, to incorporate the garbage, the loading, and all of those elements to meet the functional needs of the users as well. So as such, we're of the opinion the request is consistent with the intent of the official plan. In terms of the existing zoning for the site, it is in a C zone, and we are proposing to place it in a site-specific commercial uses zone to permit the proposed development. And it is in the 8499, whereas if you're across the street, you'd be in downtown and harbor zoning bylaw, but we're just on the fringe in 8499. So in terms of the relief we're requesting, commercial uses are permitted as well as residential, but it doesn't explicitly state that a mixed-use building is permitted, so we'll be specifying that. We're asking for the building height of 6 stories and the setbacks as you saw shown on the site plan. The amenity space proposed is 10 meters squared per unit. We're requesting a relief on the parking ratio to 0.49 per unit on residential, and the commercial parking ratio of 1 per 150 meters squared of gross leasable area, as well as to permit off-site parking within 460 meters. Reduce parking dimensions as well as reduce parking space dimension, bicycle parking space dimensions to allow for this sort of stacked system that we're proposing. In terms of the justification, I kind of touched on sort of the elements of where we had come from on the height piece. So just more generally, we're of the feeling the scale of development is appropriate, given it is located in a corridor, it's near transit, commercial uses, parks, and employment uses. We did complete a parking study in support of the residential and commercial parking ratios, which is being reviewed by staff. The off-site parking is within walking distance as defined by the official plan. The bike and vehicle parking spaces are functional. We run a number of traffic movements through them with the different vehicles, and the dimensions that we're proposing will work. In terms of the amenity space, the amenity area of review study does support 10 meters squared in the Princess Street corridor. As I was kind of saying there earlier, we're just, if we were across the street in the downtown, we would be, as of right, getting the 10 meters squared, or if we were located in a C4 zone in Williamsville, which again is just across this street, but we are within the corridor, and we're sort of one of the couple fringe properties that wasn't given that as of right, so we are requesting it. In terms of the amenity space proposed, there are private balconies, as well as indoor common and outdoor common area, and they all meet the functional requirements specified in the bylaw. So now switching gears over to 227 Brock. Again, this relates to the site that we're going to be providing the off-site parking on. And the request is to permit a reduced parking ratio and dimensions. So the site is already developed. There is no new development proposed at 227 Brock. There's an existing 10-unit residential building, and there's an existing parking area at the rear, which does accommodate 10 parking spaces. So with the 10 units allocated, there's 1 space per each unit. There's 10 spaces at the back there. We are requesting a reduction to 0.5 spaces, so that 5 spaces will be allocated to 227 Brock, and 5 spaces will be allocated to 168 Division Street through an off-site parking agreement. So the total number of parking spaces will be unchanged. It's just a matter of reconfiguring and formalizing the parking layout and allocating the spaces differently. The site is in a central business district in the official plan. Residential uses and parking are permitted. In terms of the zoning, it's in a C1-1 zone, so we'll need site-specific relief to permit what we're requesting. As mentioned, it's related to the reduced parking ratio for the 10 existing units in the building, as well as reduced parking space dimensions. So no parking is being added, it's just being reconfigured and reallocated. This parking study completed by WSP does support the request. I know lots of, you may have looked on the aerial and you'll see that there are often 10 cars parked there, or a number of cars parked there. Only the tenants of the building that actually rent the spaces in the past 3 years has only been, there's actually sort of an uptake of 3 spaces for the 10 residential units, and then the remainder of the spaces have been subsequently leased out by the tenants to other individuals. So the parking study did consider that, and then as well as they did a comparable analysis in the area, and the dimensions and layout were reviewed by the traffic engineer, and they did a number of turning movements to demonstrate that they are functional because it is a tight space back there. So overall, we're of the opinion both sites and the requested amendments are appropriate in that they're consistent with the PPS, they conform to official plan policies, and are compatible with surrounding land uses. And we're of the opinion the proposed development represents good planning and is in the public interest. And I would be happy to answer any questions from the committee and then subsequently the public.
Great, thank you very much. I'll turn to the planning staff just to talk about circulations and such.
We have 2 properties for this circulation. So for 168 Division Street, a sign was placed on the property 20 days in advance of the meeting, and notices were sent by mail to all 119 property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. For 227 Brock Street, a sign was also placed on the property 20 days in advance of the meeting, and notices were sent by mail to all 83 property owners within 120 meters of the property. And for both, an ad was placed in the Whig Standard as a courtesy. To date, we've had no written public comments on the application. I have had a phone call with an adjacent landowner to clarify the parking arrangement for 227 Brock and was able to provide them a plan showing them how that would work.
Thank you much. I'll turn now if there are any questions or comments from committee members. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I just wondered about the parking and the 5 spots over at on Brock Street. How will you determine which spot, like which tenants get those 5 spots? Will there be any criteria, or will it just be first come, first serve? They get a park on site on Division and Garrett, and after that, you're going to be going over to Brock Street.
On? Red is on? Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm not entirely sure how the details of the parking will work. My understanding is often a unit won't necessarily come with a parking space because often the intended user doesn't need one, but they have them available, and then it would be first come, first serve. And I would, as you mentioned, I would think that people would take 168 sites first, and then the further away ones second. I will mention that the commercial parking, 2 of the spaces are allocated to the retail space, and they will be provided on site at 168 Division Street.
Thank you. And for visitor parking to the 10, so of the 14 spots that are going to be there on Division Street, and then 2 of those spots are for the commercial, are any of those designated for visitors?
Through you, Mr. Chair, designated to visitors. I guess unlike the city of Ottawa, which has a sort of a specific ratio in its bylaw to allocate parking to visitors, the city of Kingston hasn't incorporated something like that to date. So there wouldn't be any designated visitor parking on site per se, but there is on-street parking in the area, and it's obviously in a very walkable neighborhood relative to lots of things. So.
Thank you. And my last question, double-stacked bicycle storage. Did you say that there is a slide to kind of show what that looks like? Thank you.
So this is it. This is what had been provided by the architect. And so that we have measured that there are dimensions there that you can pull it down, but my understanding is effectively you like take your bike, you load it up, and then you kind of, the rack then lifts up and kind of slots back into its spot, and then would come down. So you can have sort of, it'll end up being two tiers of bicycle parking effectively. So sort of similar, I'm not sure if you've seen sort of the car stacking, but similar idea. Of being accessed that way to, obviously the site's pretty tight, so we're trying to make sure that we were providing a lot, and this kind of filled the niche.
Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the bicycles since they're up there. Are you stacking the bicycles on their sides? Is that what's going on here?
I don't think so. Like, I think it's, I think you, like, the bottom one you would wheel in like you would normally wheel in, and then the second one, I'm imagining it's like a long, it's embarrassing, I don't know, like a long tray that then you put roll the wheel up into, and so then it's kind of in like its own little case, and then you push it up. So my understanding is that they would be stacked horizontally, but normally how you would have a bike. I don't know if that helps you at all.
Well,
like I think they roll in here and here like this. Like this is looking at it straight on.
right, it looks more like a plane than it does like a bike. So
I can certainly look
that's an
at
idle
providing you more details
observation, perhaps.
about it.
Well, the problem is fairly clear, that the bylaw calls for 0.6 meters wide, or about 23.6 inches wide, and you're saying it'll be 9.84 inches wide, and that's a very small bike. So, and then it calls for something to be almost 7 feet high, 83 inches high, and you're saying you can get away with a meter. 3'3", 3'3". So, or 4. So, I can't tell from that whether that you're actually, so I'll just ask staff to look at that, okay? Make sure it's a system that actually works. Now I had a question about the parking as well. And that's because the general rule is that parking off-site for residents, that is in detached houses or townhouses, is got to be within 60 meters. And you're saying you're going to have a significant part of your parking for this building 500 or 460, 80 meters away, to be precise. Here it's described as 500. So do you have any alternatives for that? The big problem is, just to be clear, is that people are not allowed to park in the front yards. Okay, so when we tell them they can't do it, they're told they have to find parking within 60 meters of their house. So, when you deal with bylaw, okay? So the question is, under what rationale should we allow you to do something that's 8 times further away than that? That's the question.
So with respect to the off-site parking, again, sort of when we were doing our preliminary discussions with staff, obviously, as I mentioned, the site's constrained, and it becomes very costly to start going underground, and adds substantial cost to the project. So we, again, given that they knew sort of the tenants and the general uptake on parking, we were sort of looking at some alternatives. How can we provide some parking and sort of meet a ratio that we think can be supported, and then to provide a solution. So High Point obviously does have a number of properties in the area. We looked at a number of them, and we started saying, okay, there were some closer. Could we break up and put 2 spaces on 2 different properties? And it was getting, then you'd be kind of tying all these different properties together. So sort of the solution that we came up with staff when we were working with them at the time was sort of effectively anything sort of within 500 meters. That means I believe the official plan defines walking distance as 600 meters. That if we could find a site within that radius, that would be appropriate. I mean, in terms of it being so far away, the intention is that the people that have cars in this building and that are parking off-site are likely not using their cars every day. We are obviously in a very walkable area. Employment uses along Princess. We're close to Queens there, as well as the hospital. So the intention of when you provide off-site parking, asking them to walk 500 meters, it's certainly not people who are using their car 5 times a day and need to do that commute every day. So sort of the location that was selected sort of met the criteria we discussed with staff, and as I mentioned, it does meet the definition of walking distance in the OP, and it consolidates it all on one site. So
Okay, is that 600 meters walking distance to what, though? Is it 600 meters for transit, or is it 600 meters for parking?
I'm not highly, correct me if I'm wrong on interpreting your question. Like in the official plan, there's a definition for walking distance, and walking distance is defined as something within 600 meters. So whether it's a transit stop, whether it's parking, whether it's any retail use, that's my understanding of the definition. If staff have a different interpretation.
Couple of last questions. Are you committed to the architectural drawings that are showed us?
So we had, as I mentioned, we had made a submission originally, which had different drawings and generally the same built form, but we have been working on the materials. We've tried to add articulation to the building. And so we were presenting a revised design based on feedback we'd gotten preliminary from staff. Sort of we'll take the comments away from tonight's meeting and continue to try and work to make a design that happens, a design that we can get everyone on board with. So we are certainly open to hearing suggestions. As I mentioned, sort of in terms of the built form, it is a tight site, and we've prioritized sort of that setback off of Brock Street and pushing the building towards the streetscape. So then we've tried to use materials to kind of break up the building on Garrett and Brock there. So if you have suggestions on materials or elements you'd like incorporated, or architectural design features, the applicant would certainly be happy to look at them and see if we can make something work.
Well, I'm sure we appreciate with staff, and I believe in speaking to them that we can see you've been doing that. So from what you said, however, you're not sure what the materials will be at this time. And that could be negotiated?
So at this point, we submitted an application for zoning bylaw amendment. The materials, nothing in the zonings is specified about the materials. That's something that's addressed through site plan control. So we will have to submit a site plan control application, and that's where the materials will be finalized, and we'll have to adhere to whatever's selected in site plan. Site plan is dealt with through staff, so we try to present the materials to the committee so that they can have input at this stage. So, as I mentioned, the materials weren't necessarily showing. I know I said they were kind of showing as a burnt orange where it was supposed to be red. So if there are preferences material-wise, we can certainly take them back to the architect and the applicant and see if there's something we can do to incorporate them or change them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think this is a great example of the kind of downtown infill that we're looking for. So I'm favorably disposed to this kind of development. My question would be, if this building, and I'm just talking about the Garrett Street building, were up in Williamsville off of Princess Street, would the allocation of parking spaces on that site be within the bylaw? No, still not? Okay, so it just seems to me that I think they're making a real effort to try and incorporate more parking into a site where on some level we're hoping that people don't bring their cars into the downtown as much. So I understand that that's what's required right now, but I like the proposal as it's shown there. Thank you.
Thank you. And if Councillor Rosanek could take the chair.
I take the chair and recognize
Thank you. I have a few questions. I noticed, and I appreciate, I am really supportive of the Williamsville corridor study, and you reference it for one variance that you're seeking. But I have some concerns because there are other aspects of the Williamsville study that I don't believe your proposal has adopted. Setback, for instance. We have an urban, we have a active transportation plan. Our priority is enhancing pedestrian. And I'm not sure about, it looks almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, as if there's a zero setback or just a minimal setback along Garrett. And I appreciate that, at least in the sketches, it looks like a wider setback along Division, but Division being a corridor, I would hope that there was enough setbacks so that you were actually enhancing the pedestrian way. Would you care to comment on that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, the study that I was explicitly referencing was the amenity review study completed by Dillon Consulting, not the Williamsville study. I was referring to how the amenity review study had been implemented in the Williamsville zoning and in the downtown bylaw, just to speak a bit to that piece. So no, I haven't reviewed the proposal against the Williams study specifically. But yes, generally can speak to the comments that you made. The setback on Garrett Street is effectively like a 0 meter setback. We have sort of, before we did have just a straight wall, we have tried to incorporate articulations to add a bit more. If you're familiar with Garrett Street at all, it is a very narrow street. So we're kind of challenged with working with sort of this very narrow street, and then you've got Division Street, which is much wider, and And the thought was sort of to provide the active patio space out front of Division Street, because that would be desirable for the commercial tenant. I can certainly see and talk to the architect and the applicant about should we push that forward and see if there's a way to add more of a setback along Garrett Street. But in sort of the slide that I had shown to sort of show the at-grade uses, we have tried to enhance the public realm sort of with the glazing, the materials, but there are limitations in the setbacks.
Thank you. If I was a cynic, might say that you were cherry picking from the Williamsville plan when you wanted some relief on amenity space, but not on some of the other really positive things. And so,
Yes, thank you for
with
clarifying.
all due respect, parking aside, off-site parking, I'm going to ask this question of staff. It's my understanding that that goes onto a deed, and the owner of that property where the offset parking is going cannot sell their property without fulfilling the requirements of the deeded parking from another site. Is that accurate?
Site parking, we do require site plan control for that property. As part of the site plan control agreement, there are conditions within that specify it'll have X number of spaces for off-site parking. So that's how it's carried over from owner to owner, whether the property is sold or not. It's in the site plan control agreement.
Yeah. My concern is that we assign that off-site parking so they fulfill their requirement. But then if in 10 years' time, they want to sell that property, is that parking actually written on the deed so that they would have to get resolved?
Through you, Mr. The site plan agreement is registered on title, and it's read with the property. It's not registered to the property owner. So any site plan agreements would be reviewed by a future property owner and their real estate lawyer to ensure that they're aware of all of the agreements that are instruments that are registered on title, and the future owners are also obligated to fulfill those conditions.
And my other question regarding the parking on that site, I would assume that that 10 unit, when approval was gained for that 10 unit apartment, the zoning requirement at the time would have been 1 per unit, so would have required 10 parking spaces. But we're now removing 5 of the required parking spaces from that agreement. Am I missing something here?
There are 10 units in that building now. I believe this building, being an old limestone building, was constructed prior to the current zoning bylaw, so it does have legal non-conforming status. So moving forward, I think what the owners are trying to do is look at the actual optimization and usage rates of the building and understand the parking ratios in the area to look at a revised parking rate for that property. So the building being as it is now, while it does provide 10 parking spaces, I don't believe when it was constructed had these same provisions that we have today in the zoning bylaw.
Follow up with some questions about that later, so I can get my head around it. The bike parking, I'm wondering if I'm a tenant there, is my bike going to be totally secure? Because quite frankly, the core of Kingston is probably the bike theft capital of Canada. So is your system totally secure for bicycle parking?
So the bicycle parking will be within that ground floor area, and actually it will be secure from the outside. All the 36 bikes will be accessible, I guess, to all of the tenants. I'm not I need to do some more research on this system, clearly, and I'm not sure if there's a way to lock your bike to this system, but there will be like a door to the vehicular entrance and the loading dock along Garrett Street, so you wouldn't have external users of the site coming into that area. And then along the back of the property, part of the garage is open air, but will be appropriately screened and have secure mesh along the outside. But I can certainly see about options about securing it so that tenant A doesn't take tenant B's bicycle.
Perhaps staff can flag that so that the comprehensive report talks not just about bike parking, but talks about secure bike parking. My other question is, your parking proposed, there are new AODA standards for accessible parking. Will you be meeting, I noticed you're requesting a slightly diminished parking space allocation. Will all of how many of the accessible parking spaces will there be, and will they all be up to current AODA standards?
Yes, all the accessible parking proposed will meet AODA standards. We have run sort of the turning ratios to make sure everyone can get in and out. They will be able to comply on both 227 Brock, we've incorporated one there, and at 168 Division, we've got the one type A and the one type B.
Thank you. And I just have two more really quick questions. One, I think this is probably for staff. I know that we request an urban design very thorough peer review on major or complex projects. Will that be requested on this proposal, or can we request it on this proposal?
In this, through you, Mr. Chair, in this instance, staff have made a preliminary determination that a peer review of the urban design study is not required, and we've done a very comprehensive review internally. We have communicated to the applicant that pending the submission of their second circulation, that we might require that second circulation to be peer reviewed depending on the nature of the revisions that have been submitted.
And I'm looking forward to the future submission, because I mean, you mentioned yourself, it's a challenging site because it's a very tight site. I'm concerned that we're trying to fit a size 12 foot into a size 10 shoe. It is a really, really tight site for the requirements. So I look forward to your future submissions. So, and I think I've had enough time. Thank you. So I will now open it up for public questions or public comments. Yes. Hello, Councillor Stroud.
Sorry, just as ex officio member, not as a planning committee member, just have a couple questions about the parking that I wasn't intending on asking. I liked the approach that I saw in the proposal, but I wanted to clarify some things because some of the questions may have confused the public. So in the chart on page 899 of the package, it's the chart of what the regulation is and then what the proposed amount is. Sorry, at page 11 that has the parking one. And I think the chair spoke to this about, so there's 10, correct me if I'm wrong, there's 10 parking spaces currently at the site in the old building which predates the zoning bylaw. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. And then the calculation that's on page 11, 5.3A, section B2, the calculated one is by square meters, and it says 10 parking spaces, 28 square meters per space, right? 278 square meters, it's 27.8 actually. So is that's a different calculation that comes to the same number 10?
We're actually, through Chair, we're looking at two different provisions. So the chart that you're looking at here, I believe, relates to 168 Division Street. The 10 parking spaces that I think you're speaking about are at 227 Brock Street. Residential parking ratios are assigned at a per unit basis, whereas the provision you've referenced here is the non-residential off-street parking ratio, which is for the commercial spaces, and that's why it's done at a per square meter basis, not a per unit basis.
Okay, I'm looking at that on page 16, I guess, of the package. Also calculates 10 parking spaces. That's one parking space per unit with the current non-conforming use of the current building. And then the requirement would be, what's proposed is half of that, which is the 5 parking spaces Councillor Neal was talking about. But what is the requirement under the current bylaw?
Well, on the looking at under 5.22.5 on page 16, regulations, what is required now is 1 parking space per unit, which I've calculated is 10 parking spaces. So that's what's currently required, given the number of units that have been developed on site. The proposed, which is the second column next to it, is what they're seeking relief for, which is half a parking space per unit, which would give them the 5 that would be associated with the existing residential.
Okay, so on the Brock Street difference is 5 parking spaces, and on the Division Street, it's a different category because that's the commercial, but it also, it's going from 10 to 2, is that correct? Is this also, are we talking about both of these proposals at once? Yeah, okay. So 5.3A, page 11, 1 space for every 28 square meters. So that's the way you calculate commercial parking spaces, correct?
That's correct. And if you look at the chart that you're looking at on page 11, 5.3A, little a, number 2.1, that specifies the parking space per dwelling unit in the C zone, which is 1 space per dwelling unit.
Right. Okay,
And what they're proposing is 0.49.
Okay, so similarly for the residential, half of the requirement.
That's correct.
On both sides. Okay, so my question, I guess it's to staff, is this, because I remember when the report on the interim control bylaw file came from planning, or from the planning department, there was a change in the recommendation, there was a recommendation for a change in the number of parking spaces or the calculation of parking spaces. So has that already been enacted is my first question. And my second question will have to do with the current study.
Through you, Mr. Chair, parking study that was referenced in the interim control bylaw study is currently underway. We have not presented the proposed ratios to the public yet, so we're actually in the final throes of working through that draft study with the consultant, and we're anticipating consulting with the public on that in the near future. So to answer your question, the current standard does not reflect the work that we're doing that would establish parking ratios for multi-unit dwellings on a per bedroom basis rather than per dwelling unit basis. So that's the work that's underway. Okay,
so so that clarifies that there wasn't a change that was in effect that was in effect from that initiative, other than the study and whatever comes out of the study, and it has not been discussed yet. Are you able to say whether the study will end, if it was applied to this building, would it change the number of parking units from the requirement of 1 per unit in an upward or downward fashion? Is it possible to say what is being discussed, like which trend we're discussing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have current draft ratios in front of me. We would have to review it on how many bedrooms are in each unit and do a comparison of the ratios. In general, a number of the ratios would go down from the 1 parking space per dwelling unit to a lower ratio to reflect the smaller unit sizes. I know that a number of the units in this building are a larger 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 5-bedroom.
3, 4.
2-3-4 bedroom ratio. So right now the study is looking at specific ratios that would be associated with those. So I would have to go through and do a direct comparison, but that's work that staff can certainly do and provide to council.
Okay, so final question on this. Is there going to be a difference, a geographical difference in the requirement, the parking requirement, based on where in the city you're building?
Mr. Chair, yes, there will be. So the draft recommendations are proposing 4 different parking areas within the city. So the center and Williamsville Main Street corridor would have the lowest parking ratios, followed by areas that are on closer to the center and on a express transit route, followed by areas that are on express transit routes that are outside of the center, and then followed by the rest of the city. So we are looking at a transit-based approach to parking ratios. So this would be in an area where we're proposing the lowest ratios out of all of the ratios.
Okay, so that's the important point, I guess, the answer to my. So a division in Princess is central as it gets, and there's a transit route, express routes, and regular routes on division. So all of those, it's the maximum transit service on this corridor. And I'm guessing, so now my question is to you, so is this how you ended up comfortable with asking of a relief of 0.5 to 1, a ratio of 2 to 1 for the parking? Is that was that kind of with those requirements that we just went over part of your thinking?
So through you, Mr. Chair, as part of our submission, we did have a parking study completed by WSP. So generally my understanding of how they sort of do that is they look at comparable sites and what the uptake on those sites is, and then they say whether or not they can support the ratio. In this case, on similar sites, they'd seen an uptake of 0.5, hence why they could support the ratios we were proposing. I guess more generally, sort of also some of the thinking behind providing off-site parking is that maybe not now, but in the future, as we sort of become hopefully more transit-oriented, more walking, that we see the ratios come down, and we wouldn't even necessarily need those off-site parkings for a project like this. Obviously, it's very costly to kind of build it into the project, going underground or doing above ground parking. So that's sort of the general thinking is hopefully maybe that's where we get to, but for right now, again, the parking study did support it, and that's where the thinking was behind that. So I am very excited and curious to see the results of the study staff are working on.
Great, thank you.
Can I just sum up with my
Very
comment?
quickly,
Yeah.
You're just over your 5 minutes.
Yeah, but that was not, you're not supposed to count the time that is spent in the answers to the questions, Mr. Chair. I don't have much more to say other than there are two trends in today's cities that we need to be aware of and that are the reason for the recalculation of the parking ratios. One of those trends is that the closer you are to the center, the less car dependent you are. Everybody can agree that's already the reality, and I'm a living example myself. The other trend is that with the demographic, commonly known as millennials, car use is astonishingly low, like way, way, way lower than in any other demographic. And that would be a large proportion of the users, I'm guessing, in this core high-density area once it's open. So just those two trends are, we might actually miss the mark with our recalculations and actually still be overdoing it for parking. Just remember, at some point we might have to decide what we want in our downtown, people or cars, and if we have to choose between the two, people pay taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public who wishes to speak to the project? Yes, and just a reminder, I was derelict. I should have recognized the counselor as a counselor ex officio and given him an opportunity to speak when we were still in the committee. But just a reminder, you ask your questions and make your comments, and you have 5 minutes to do so. And then at the end of that, staff or the proponent have an opportunity to answer or comment on your comments. Okay? So that was my faux pas. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K 4J4. So I'm a Williamsville resident who lives about 10 blocks away from this proposed development, the one on Division. So a lot of what I had has already been covered, so I won't repeat the excellent points raised so far. Now, one I've got trouble with is looking at pages 8 and 9, where you have your charts of what you're asking for relief on. And when it comes to the height, it seems that the as of right height is 15 meters, because you've got one that's 12 and one that's 18. And if you were to average them, that's 15, and you're asking for 19.9. That's my calculation anyway. I'm not sure if that's how you do it. So that's about 1/3 over, right? I think that's a very important number to keep in track. Second question is, are there any existing heritage aspects on the buildings that are proposed to be demolished? Now, my third point, I think this is the most important point that I'm going to be making, is that the drawings you're providing show staircases only and no elevators, and you've got 6 stories here. So if you're going to have no elevators, you're limiting the range of tenants who may be able to live there to those who are mobile and active and athletic and so forth. So going along with that, what are the existing City of Kingston regulations stating, as well as the Planning Act of Ontario and the official plan, as to the minimum height that a building has to have to require elevators? Could you build a 100-story building with no elevators? Don't think you'd want to do that, right? Elevators were invented in the 1800s at some point, so they're a fact of life. They've been around. I can't support this project for that reason. I'm generally supportive of it. We need, greater density in the downtown. We certainly need more housing. Those are 2 aces in your favor, right? If you had elevators proposed, I would be supportive almost entirely of it, along with some minor points. So going along with that, I think it's a very significant point, is you don't have any outside fire escapes shown here either, right? You got a high-density building that's 6 stories and no elevators. So I think planning staff have to explain this as being a safe building with this proposal. I don't see it that way, and I've got a tech background. Okay? Do we have any comparable buildings within a few blocks where we have 6 stories and no elevators with this sort of density?
I believe you've made your point, and I think it'll probably be corrected that indeed there are elevators.
I've got some more points as well, Mr. Chair. If I'll use my 5 minutes, if I could. Just as a point of information, there's express transit at the corner between Division and Barrie on both Princess and Brock, and then there's regular transit right across the street on Route 4. Okay?
30 seconds.
Okay. And this is a substantial development, so what is the threshold, as explained by staff on a peer review? Is that in terms of number of units? And does the Big Dig 4 work that's been done right there, is that enabling this project to be built due to increased draw on utilities and water and so forth? Do we have the capacity to be able to handle this project? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So I just wanted to take a moment. My name is Donald Mitchell. I'm a resident at 43 Gibson Avenue. And at a very, very high level, because I know that a couple of us in the public have made this comment, I felt it was worth saying. I thought it was a very attractive building. And I think there was a seam of favor in some of the reaction of some of us. So I felt that was worth knowing. I think part of it is the materials. And I know one of the councillors referred to that. And so I think that variation of materials seemed very attractive to us. I wanted to ask a couple of things that are going to get in the nature of the Ontario Building Code and accessibility. I mean them at a very, very high level, but I just had a few curious things that I think are also, they lead to positives. One is I'm a big fan of the at-grade entrance. I think that that's really important. We often think of the person that's living there, but we also have to think of the person who is visiting. I think it's an excellent location for access to downtown amenities, drugstores, restaurants, and places. So I think there will be a lot of diversity of people who would be attracted to living in such a site. So in terms of the accessibility, these questions are more intended to go towards the positive, but does the building actually have like barrier-free access into the common areas? If someone came, would they get to the door of their friend, their neighbor? What is the width of those doors? I'm assuming it all meets Ontario Building Code. And in which case, maybe in a 6-story building, I'm not an expert, but maybe it's basically inherent in the code itself. Would some of the units actually have a measure of accessibility? We often think of accessibility as one extreme, from another, but there is a whole range of, a whole diversity of disability, and I wondered if some of the ground floor stuff or some areas might actually have a reasonable level of accessibility. I think that would be a very positive thing, and it might be a subtle change you might be able to make, considering the parking. I wondered about, there's a variance about the length, I think, of the accessibility parking. On one of them. I think that's the only variance I saw, and I saw 3 spots. I just wanted to caution that, and obviously you know this, and obviously it goes through the city's accessibility site plan, but sometimes those ranges are there to accommodate different vehicles and different needs. So I just throw that out there. The biggest thing that I thought was a real positive was, if I read it correctly and it was quick, there's under the building accessible parking. Is that correct? And if it is, I commend that, because I think it's really important in inclement weather, especially weather that we're all experiencing right now, that there is an opportunity to park indoors, and if the height is the correct height that might accommodate a van or a car in a reasonable level, and it gets people out of the elements, I think that's really important to that community. But in general, just looking at it from a high-level resident perspective, I thought it looked really attractive. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, the floor is yours.
Clearly should have done a better job labeling our drawing if there was such confusion over the elevators. There are elevators through Mr. Chair. They are indicated, I'm sorry, this is such a lousy pointer, but the 2 elevator shafts are here, so there will be elevator access for the 6 floors. There is also, I had mentioned this was the primary residential entrance where you'll have the lobby and your mail and get access to the elevators and all of that, but there is also a secondary residential exit that would exit to Division Street, and my understanding from the architect is, again, to meet all the necessary code requirements for entering and exiting a building. So hopefully that addresses that primary concern about it being safe and meeting code requirements. There was a comment about the big dig, and actually they were doing work in this area at the same time as we were sort of in pre-consultation with staff. So I'm not sure if specifically the upgrades enabled this project, but we were able to capitalize on coordinating upgrades to services that we needed to the site at the time. So it's been great working with staff to facilitate. Obviously, there is a fee, but there is cost savings ultimately overall. In terms of the heritage, to my knowledge, it wasn't phrased by staff that it was a designated property or in proximity to a heritage property that would trigger the need for a heritage impact assessment or anything like that. With respect to the accessibility, so the 2 accessible spaces are provided Indoors, as I mentioned, that parking area will be fully enclosed, and they are located near the nearest entrance in there. I'm not an architect myself, so my understanding is everything has been designed to meet accessibility requirements as per the building code. And I'm not. I can't think off the top of my head. About the length. I was under the impression we were meeting everything, but I can certainly check and make sure that we are meeting the required standards. And as I mentioned, we had run turning movements to make sure that like an accessible van with a lift could back in and out of those spaces. I will pass along the comments to the architect and the proponent about the accessible units, because I'm not sure if any of them are, but I appreciate that comment, and we'll pass that along. I think I've tried to address everything. Yes, in terms of the materials, as I mentioned, they will be determined at site plan, but if people have specific materials they are interested in, we are open to hearing them. As we've gone back and forth within our team a lot on the materials, so obviously subjective in nature, but always good to have different ideas. So with that, I think I will, unless there's anything further.
Thank you very much. Staff had no comments to make? No. We'll go back into the committee very quickly, and then we'll close this meeting. Are there any comments or forgotten comments? No? Okay. Just very quickly, if you want to talk to staff about parking, I know the university suites, to meet their parking requirement, we're proposing a 4-story parking garage where the Brooklyn is now, which would be a lot more convenient for, and I know 2 stories were for their parking and 2 were going to be commercial. So you may want to contact them. So, okay, I will close this meeting and we'll move on to our second and last public meeting, which is 218 Albert Street. So the floor is yours. And Mr. Dixon, if you have any questions, you'll need to ask them outside of this public meeting, okay? Thank you very much. Or you can ask them when it's the public's turn, okay? Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Emma Stuckey. I'm a planner at IBI Group, and I will be presenting, along with my colleague Nancy Wortman, the proposal for 218 Albert Street on behalf of Jason Song. So this application is requesting a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the construction of a new 3-unit dwelling. The site is located at 218 Albert Street. It's located at the west side of Albert Street between Cooper Street and Union Street. It's in a primarily residential area and is nearby to Queen's University. There's an existing dwelling on the site, an existing 2-story dwelling on the site, and the surrounding neighborhood is comprised mainly of 2- and 3-story brick buildings. The proposal is to demolish the existing dwelling to construct a new 3-story dwelling, consisting of 3 residential units. Each unit will consist of 4 bedrooms for a total of 12 bedrooms on the site. 2 parking spaces are proposed in the rear yard, as well as 3 parking spaces indoors. Adequate amenity area and open space are provided. Here is a picture of the site plan. The proposed development is outlined in pink. The existing building is shown as the brown outline. As you can see, the proposed development is consistent width of the existing building. However, it does extend further into the rear yard. 2 parking spaces are proposed in the rear yard, and they are accessed by a paved driveway along the south side of the property connecting to Albert Street. There is also a turnaround feature, so that way cars are easily able to back in and out. The units are accessed, they each have individual entryways. Unit 1 is accessed by Albert Street by a raised porch. Units 2 and 3 are accessed on the south side of the building, and they are accessed by a walkway connecting Albert Street to the rear yard. Covered garbage storage is proposed to be located in the rear yard, and the remaining space in the rear yard is proposed to be grass landscaped area, which will be used as the functional open space for the residents. In coming up with the design of the building, the applicant and us went back and forth with city staff in order to come up with a development that's compatible with the existing neighborhood. As you can see, the design features bay windows, dormers, as well as a porch feature, which are all common architectural elements in the neighborhood. The materials are proposed to be red brick with painted cedar siding, asphalt shingles, and white window trim. And again, you can see the entranceways on the front and south, just depicting those accesses we discussed earlier. Moving to policy, the proposed development is designated residential in the official plan and proposes a density of 44 dwelling units per net hectare. Under the OP, this is classified as a medium-density residential use. However, the built form is consistent with what would be considered low density in terms of the look of the building. This is an appropriate site for medium-density residential uses, as it's compatible with surrounding uses, is located near commercial uses, as well as transit on Union Street, institutions such as Queen's University, Kingston General Hospital, and is near commercial amenities on the Princess Street corridor. Overall, the proposed development, the residential use, is compatible with adjacent residential uses. It's not anticipated to create adverse effects. There's adequate amenity area, parking, and out-landscaped open space to meet the functional needs of the users, and it helps achieve the city's intensification targets. Overall, this request is consistent with the intent of the official plan. Moving to zoning, the existing zoning for the property it's located in a 1-family and 2-family A zone. The proposed zoning is to place the zone or the property in a site-specific B zone, and this is in order to permit 3 dwelling units, which would not otherwise be permitted in the A zone. So this proposal looks to place the lands in a site-specific B zone in order to recognize the 3 dwelling units, and includes provisions for amended standards for minimum yards, lot coverage, and parking. So this location is appropriate for higher density given its proximity to transit, commercial uses, parks, and institutions. The minimum yards, the yards are consistent with the existing dwelling on Albert Street and are in line with the adjacent houses on either side, which is desirable in terms of the OP and zoning. And as well, the lot coverage is a fairly minor increase. We are asking for a reduced parking ratio. This is given the owner's experience with anticipated demand. We do note that there is adequate space to provide a 3rd parking in the rear yard if the public seems to think that the 2 spaces would be inadequate. And again, there is sufficient amenity space, landscaped open space requirements. They are all met. In conclusion, it's our opinion that the proposed amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to official plan policies, and is compatible with surrounding land uses. We are of the opinion that the proposed development represents good planning and is in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to staff to comment on the file.
And through you, Mr. Chair. Application was noticed per the requirements of the Planning Act. That included public notification provided by big signage placed on the subject property. It included a notification in our Kingston WIG standard, as well as public mailouts to 105 properties located within a 120-meter radius of the site, all of which was provided minimum of 20 days before tonight's meeting. To date, staff have received 4 pieces of written correspondence, some of which was received in advance of the agenda being printed, so it was included. The information received closer to tonight's meeting is attached for you tonight in addendum form. Further to that, staff have received approximately 3 phone calls and conversed with neighbors regarding the proposal and welcomed their attendance here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. To the committee now, if there are questions or comments. Yes, Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the applicant, for the rear yard, not that I want to convert any of the proposed landscape open space, but I read in tonight's comments that some people have a concern that there's not enough bicycle parking. Instead of putting the bike parking in the basement of the 3 units, is there any space in the rear yard to put a shed to accommodate? And some of the bike parking, is it going in the garage, or was the intent to put all of the bike parking in the basement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent was to do the indoor bicycle storage in the basement of each unit. However, there is adequate space in the rear yard to provide covered bicycle parking closer to the walkway or in the rear yard beside the vehicle parking.
Okay, thank you. And for the study, like it looks like there's on the top floor, there's two areas that are considered like maybe to be study areas. And what would prevent those from being used as bedrooms? Like, is it because like there's not closet space, so therefore they wouldn't be able to be used as bedrooms because there's no closets, or what would prevent that from being used as closets, as bedroom?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the site-specific zoning does include a maximum number of bedrooms, so the proposed development will be restricted to 12 bedrooms for the development. As well, the site-specific zoning provides a definition of bedrooms, which says that common areas open to all occupants of the unit are not considered bedrooms. So again, the 2 study units don't have doors as well. So they're shown in green again. So the green is the sort of roof. So the space in them is not necessarily functional to be a bedroom, and again would be restricted by the maximum bedroom in the zoning bylaw.
Thank you. And I know in your presentation you mentioned recycling would be. Can you just mention that again, please?
Yes, covered garbage and recycling is proposed in the rear yard, just up against the building is where it's shown currently.
And that still gives room for like landscape? Yes.
Yes, there is still adequate room. I believe we're at a 45% landscape open space currently, so there is some flexibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you. It does seem like quite a departure, this street. It looks to me, I drove down there tonight before I came to the meeting, and it looks to me as though that is a pretty long-standing neighborhood without this kind of development previously. And I'm wondering, first of all, the heritage status of the building that's there now, and secondly, whether or not this sort of fits with the sort of, I guess, the long-standing, it would appear to me, sort of streetscape or kind of neighborhood that exists there now.
So here we have some images taken from Google Street View of existing development in the area. So the first one is the house immediately adjacent on the corner, followed by the existing dwelling next to the red brick house. You can see from the street, sort of that juxtaposition, the existing dwelling is shorter compared to the 2- and 3-story buildings next to it. And then across the street, it is quite common to have 2- and 3-story red brick buildings. And in terms of heritage, we weren't aware of any heritage designation on this property or the need for a heritage impacts study based on pre-consultation with staff.
I'll maybe just to jump on and add to what Emma said. We did work through a lot of designs and went back and forth with staff a number of times, as Emma pointed to in the image, sort of the two houses on either side are big red brick homes, so we've tried to incorporate something that we think would be compatible with those into the design, as that house as it currently sits is actually much smaller than those other homes.
So it would be useful to have a visual rendering of that, what it will look like if it was inserted into that neighborhood with the materials and the the cladding, et cetera, that would give us a better sense of how that building would actually fit in with what's existing, in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe it's duly noted. So, could you, Councillor Sanik, could you take the chair?
And I recognize you.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, I believe that this is on a kind of watch list, although it's been listed. Am I accurate? Heritage goes, so Eddie at council could direct that we explore listing it. I believe that would be the protocol. If you could comment on that.
Through you, Mayor, you're correct. Not a listed or designated property. It is on a list of properties to be considered in the future. So at this point in time, there's no heritage protection, and staff certainly couldn't comment on the heritage value without doing further study. So at this point in time, without the listing or the designation, there is no heritage protection on the property.
Great, thank you very much. And something that was mentioned, and that frankly, I mean, some years ago, we had a lot of developers with dens and all kinds of things that clearly, especially for student housing, became bedrooms. And I thought that our policy was, if it looks like a bedroom, if it can function as a bedroom, we count it as a bedroom. Is that still our policy?
Mr. Chair, we certainly undertake a very careful review of the floor plans and ensure that we have the discussion with our building department. Through the OBC, there's very strict regulations on what's considered a bedroom and what's not considered a bedroom. So when we're looking at it from a planning perspective, we do consult and ensure that the way that we're approaching it from a zoning perspective aligns with the building code and the way that it would be inspected for those permits.
And that's important, as I understand it, because amenity space is driven by the number of bedrooms. So if you don't count bedrooms, you lower your amenity space required. But in fact, that requirement is there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification. Amenity space as presently is calculated per unit basis at 18.5 per unit in this context. And you heard in the earlier presentation in the Williamsville corridor, it's at 10 square meters per unit. That said, in a lot of the larger development applications that we've seen, I'm specifically thinking of 575 Princess Street, justifications have been put forth and amendments have been made on the justification as it relates to a bedroom unit, a bedroom square meter portion allocated. So That is something that is being explored through comprehensive work that the city is undertaking right now, but at this time, it is strictly based on a per unit basis.
Thanks for that clarification. I know that site plans formally are only triggered at 4 units, and this, of course, is 3 units. With the direction of a motion from council, could we in fact request a more formal and a more thorough site plan?
And through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. As you've mentioned, the site plan control bylaw has characters in which site plan control. This application as does not trigger and for site plan control, and for the benefit of the room, site allows an agreement to be read title that would restrict things such as the location, bicycle parking, material, etc. Through previous reporting and comprehensive recommendations put forward by staff, we have included recommendations to council that such application shall be subject to site plan control, and it has been received previously and supported through that, and this could very well be a prime candidate for such application and recommendation, although it not, as today, hit all the requirements of the specific bylaw.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And lastly, just a very quick comment on parking. I, like my colleague, Councillor Stroud, look forward to the day when we need less parking. But the reality of this site is that there's going to be, given its proximity to Queens, there's going to be 12 adults living in this 3-unit dwelling, and the idea of only having 2 parking spaces. The reality is there will be parking on the prescribed amenity space in the backyard will be a reality, I would think. So I think parking is definitely an issue on this site. So I believe the district councillor would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a thought-provoking file for me, but I have a couple questions for first. So this one, I guess, is to the applicant or to the agent. What is the current use of the building? What is the current use of the building, and if it's rental, how many tenants?
Yeah, we're still in the committee, not in the public session, so we can answer those questions individually. I'll get it right this time.
We're just trying to find the exact number of tenants. We do not know offhand the number currently in the... Okay,
I'm a neighbor that there's currently at least 6 student tenants in the building, but that up until 2017, it was a family home owned by a local family doctor. So a little bit of history there. My second question is for staff. So this proposal, because of the 3-unit is not being permitted in A zone, as you were saying, the proposal is saying that a site-specific B zone is required, which if you look on the map, I don't know if we have access to the map there, but the site itself, this property would be a B zone in the middle of the residential A zone, which is 8499, which allows up to 2 dwelling units per site. So the question is, if we amend the zoning bylaw to allow this site-specific zoning to change rezoning to B today, and then the Central Growth and Infill Strategy recommends changing areas, not individual properties, but a specific area to a higher density zone, such as B. But this street is not identified as one of those streets. Would this proposal stick out against that strategy, which is more of a big picture strategy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are currently in the process of completing the Central Kingston Growth Strategy Study. As you know, we don't have the proposed provisions that would apply in this specific area. So it's challenging in that we're not able to compare this proposal against those provisions. Certainly with the way that the new zoning bylaw was first drafted, any exception zones within that zoning bylaw would prevail. So if we were to pass an amendment in this area that had a site-specific nature to it, it's likely that through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy Study that it would be recommended to recognize those existing permissions and not blow them away. So there certainly is potential that the zoning standards in this area could change and this property would be allowed to maintain the site-specific zoning.
Okay, that's interesting. So if I could just ask, there are two other site-specific B-zoned properties that exist currently that I saw in Mr. Sand's report, one on Cooper Street and another nearby, I think, on Albert Street. So the central growth strategy, what you just said, the central growth strategy may say that on blocks or on sections of street that already have an existing B zone approved by council, the recommendation might be to approve the whole, that B zone to extend to the entire block. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as a clarification point, it would just be for that specific property. It certainly wouldn't be adopting those recommendations on a site-specific property across the entire block. It would just be maintaining those permissions on that site-specific property. Obviously, through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy Study, I think this is a discussion point that we should have with respect to how those existing permissions are treated. But right now, with the way that the first draft of the zoning bylaw is written, it would recognize those permissions on a site-specific basis, not broadly applying them across a block.
Okay, I have another question. I hope I don't run out of time about this B zone. So I think it was during the discussion on the interim control bylaw and when we were given the rationale for the central growth study itself, we were told, it might have been in a private meeting with Director of Planning, but I was told that it's not best practice to spot zone higher density zones like Swiss cheese in a larger zoning bylaw, and 804099 is our largest zoning bylaw. Is that true that it's not best practices to have this solution?
Through you, Mr. Obviously, within the Planning Act, people have the right to apply for site-specific amendments. From an overall planning perspective, I think that it would be nice to have a zoning bylaw that fits and works well within the neighborhood, so there wouldn't be the need to have site-specific amendments or have the policy framework to continuously allow different forms of development. So that being said, there is an existing framework that permits this type of application to be submitted, and there's a policy framework that would support it.
Okay, that's all my questions. My comment would be, and I'm just restricting it to this rezoning to B. There's other problems with the application, but to Councillor Hill especially, who wasn't here last term, there was a similar application at 268 Victoria that went from a 7-bedroom house, and then there was a duplex added to make it 17 bedrooms. This similarly is going from 6 bedrooms to 12. However, in this case, 3-4 unit dwellings, which is actually a positive rather than a large number of bedrooms per unit. But it's a similar kind of thing. And the backlash in my district before was surrounding monster home additions on the backs and sides of buildings, often doubling the number of bedrooms as well. If that was done here, the existing building would have been retained and a differently built addition would have been added into the backyard to give you the 12 bedrooms, and we already know that that was not popular with my residents, and they fought it. In the case of 268 Victoria, council voted against that application, and it's in appeals. In this case, what we have is a built form that's similar to a house with the dormers and everything, but it's a very large 12-bedroom house, essentially split into 3 units. So it's a different kind of thing, and I'm still getting, and we're going to hear from the public in a minute, but I have a feeling that there's going to be members of the public that equate this to the 268 proposal, although it looks quite different in many ways. And I would say that my own reading of this is that the built form is not the concern, but the just general size and density, having an apartment building in a residential area, and the potential for more spot zoning to come if we allow this, it essentially could turn out, could destroy the fabric of Albert Street. These wonderful old homes, near campus homes, obviously housed many faculty members of Queen's over the years. And actually, I was born on the street 1 block away when my father was a prof at Queen's, and a very similar house. So this is really kind of emotional for me to see us at this point. And I will respect the will of council, but I suspect we may be hearing from residents of my district that are just wishing we had the new central growth strategy already, and that we wouldn't be having these conversations where we're talking about spot zoning apartment density in the middle of a residential area. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's all the questions from the committee or comments, so I will, did you have you're looking at...
One question, it follows on Mr. Stroud's. I didn't think he got an answer to his question, whether it is best practice to allow this kind of spot zoning in an A zone being switched to a B zone. The answer he got didn't actually say whether it was best practice or not.
Through you, Mr. I don't think describing it as best practice is the appropriate way from a professional planning perspective to look at it. It's really, there are the appropriate tools and mechanisms to make this application, and we have to review it under the policies that apply in the provincial framework that we have. Obviously, the purpose and intent of going through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy study is to create a much more robust policy framework and appropriate set of zoning tools. So through that work, we're hoping to have a better set of tools to which we can evaluate this type of proposal. But for the time being, we have to use the tools that we have available to us right now.
A follow-up question, is it a stable neighborhood?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's certainly stable neighborhood policies within the official plan. So through our review of this application, we will be reviewing this application against those policies that are in section 2.6 of our official plan. So I believe our public meeting report identifies some of the 2.6 policies, and it will certainly be reviewed in a future comprehensive report.
Thank you.
If I can just comment quickly on that, it's my understanding that the presumption is it's a stable neighborhood unless it's gone through a criterial check and it's been reassigned an area in transition. So if that exercise hasn't taken place, it's my understanding that this would be considered a stable neighborhood. Is that accurate?
Through Chair, the concept of areas in transition has been removed from the official plan, so we speak to stable areas, and there's certain criteria for stable areas, so we no longer have the same language in our official plan as it relates to areas in transition.
So until further notice, this is a stable neighborhood. Is that accurate? Thank you. I will open this up for to make comments. Go ahead.
My name is Donald Mitchell, 43 Gibson Avenue. I have to run, so I'll speak first because my daughter's got to get me to bed. these are my thoughts based on what I read, which wasn't a lot of time to absorb it, and I just want to make the point that they're directed at no one other than myself and my maybe inability to understand all this. At times, it seems a disservice to all residents and community harmony to hold the statutory public meeting on an application without the public actually having the benefit of the fullest technical comments and comprehensive evaluation. The public, those requiring the most guidance and understanding, are disadvantaged to comprehend their proposed neighborhood alterations, leading to my comment about myself. We may have the wrong take. Sometimes there are many ways to go about doing something. This is an application that seeks to significantly change A zoning to B zoning, sends an unclear message to all area property owners and developers about land value and profit expectation. City planning consultant Brent Todderan said on January 17, 2018, that policy sending a clear expectation was a component of smart planning. I have a concern about what message this upzone sends to the north and south property owners and the nearby subject property and other district property owners. It appears contrary to optimum practice as suggested by sections of the Provincial Policy Statement 2014 in Section 4.0 Implementation and Interpretation, where the applicable zoning bylaws may be out of date with the OPA 50 and the Provincial Policy Statement. It appears to be resting zoning change justification on previous precedent applications, where recently approved applications referenced in the report may likewise be contrary to optimum practices and inharmonious with newer policies, despite receiving these planning approvals. The general understanding is that all applications are to proceed on their own merits. Context and planning appear out of balance, where the Central Kingston Growth and Infill Study, secondary planning, and citywide zoning bylaw update might have provided optimum community clarity. This zoning change would seem the wrong thing at this time, where major policies are potentially out of date. And then I just have a couple of quick questions just for consideration. How would this application measure in the context of the developing second residential unit new permissions policy? I just read that, and it'd be neat to know how that would fit in comparison to that. How does this application intend to meet and mitigate Section 2.7.1 of the OP? And it returns to the original point, which is we're not really given any information, and I think that you'll hear comments from many people that there is a subjective level to this, and there is some understanding that the public needs, and we really can't provide proper comment. I'd have some concern about related aspects of OP, compatibility, et cetera. How does the application intend to improve accessibility for persons with disabilities and older persons by identifying, preventing, and removing land use barriers as per the Provincial Policy Statement, Section 1.1.1.f that's referenced in the report? I just wondered why, and there's no other evidence to it. Again, I think it's something that's supposed to come later. While there is likely no planning control over interior use of space, as already mentioned, it could be 15 bedrooms. To me, it's the washrooms. You know, we live in an age where we have to have washrooms on every floor. Remove the washrooms, there's a more compelling case. It's a study to me. The large tree in the backyard, it was mentioned that there might be 3 parking spaces. It is actually one of 3 large trees in that general area. It's the smallest, but I would hope that the tree would be protected with an appropriate tree zone, and that even after construction, no hard surface would cover it because it's right up against the property line, and half of the tree zone is probably already covered as it is, and it'd be nice to see the tree protected. There are aspects of the application, such as the density, that seem appropriate to me on the property and for the area, and that's where maybe the naivety of the public. If I knew more, I might actually have slid more over for me personally that it seemed appropriate. And I wondered about the 3 to 6 unit zoning. Can it be restricted to 3 units? And for everything I've mentioned at this point, not that anybody asked my opinion, but I wouldn't support it if I was given the choice, just because for me there's a lack of clarity that I want to know more about. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your dad. Those were good questions. So, any other member of, yes? Yeah. Actually, if you, there is no microphone there, but if you move up to one of these chairs. And just a reminder, 5 minutes, but if you aren't able to cover anything in your presentation, you can send it to us in written as well, and it'll be duly noted.
I phoned you today.
So,
I wasn't there.
thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm Ruth Pester, and I think I'm probably the one most affected if this building is built. I live at 2 Cooper Street, and my property goes along the side of 4 properties, like the back, the end of the gardens. So my kitchen window is overlooking where the beautiful pool was, the beautiful garden, the beautiful property, which is now disgraceful. The trees have been cut down, the pool filled in, and now he's hoping to build some humongous, well, tear down that beautiful lady who's been kicked to the curb, which I consider that house. I have lived at 2 Cooper Street for 47 years. It'll be 48 July 1st. And I will have no natural light coming into my east-facing windows, which are my kitchen, my dining room, which is part of the living room, and that would be it. I only have windows on the other side, but it's beside a side drive and another building, and windows looking out the back. This community was an amazing community. I've brought some pictures, which I will show you later. We had profs, we had Padre Laverty, we had doctors, we had young families. It was wonderful. And then in moved the folks who wanted to make money. And you all know that the love of money is the root of all evil. Anyway, I will not get any natural light, and now tonight I hear that the cars are going to be parked behind the building, which will be right outside my window. I am really sick and tired of this sort of behavior. And we fought. Charlie, my late husband Charlie, was on the Committee of Adjustment for 3 terms. He died during the 3rd term. It was wonderful, but it was a great fight every time there was something that came up with slum landlords. And I live directly across from which used to be 1 Cooper Street. They've changed the numbers now. And the, what's his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. He built a big 3-story building attached to an older building. At the time that was built, he was not allowed to use the 3rd floor. I notice there are lights on there now, so I think it's being used. But that was not allowed. In fact, when he took the city to court, Judge Campbell said to him, "So you want to build a hotel on Cooper Street?" Well, I think we can kind of say that about Albert Street too, and what's going to happen. And I want to tell you 2 comments. I want to leave you with 2 really interesting comments, both made by young people. One by a carpenter who said to me last year, when I asked him what he thought about a certain building, I won't tell you where it is because I don't want to get him into trouble, but it's in the vicinity. He said, "I don't know how they get away with it." And this was a building that was humongous, many
30
rooms.
seconds, please.
Pardon?
30 seconds left.
Oh, okay. And the second comment is we were walking through the university area with 2 cousins of Charlie's, one from Paris, France, one from Germany, and they said this would never happen in our countries. And they meant the university area allowed to become such a mess, really, a mess. And I don't want that to happen to Albert Street, nor Cooper.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wish to comment? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Neil Donnelly, and I live at 183 Victoria Street. And I think our IT tech is going to get my brief and attachment up available on the screen in a second. So I don't know whether, from a practical point of view, you can see on the screen what I'm about to read, but I'll read it in any event, and it'll be available to you afterwards for review. So I'm speaking on my own behalf, and as co-chair.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. The clerk suggested perhaps you go to the podium because it'll be easier to to kind of scroll through and that. Thank you.
So I'm speaking on my own behalf and as co-chair of Sydenham District Association. And we are an incorporated residents association, and we object to the subject proposed development. The City of Kingston has a number of planning initiatives underway to determine appropriate types and locations for infill and densification. Example, the Central Kingston Growth Strategy. You've heard this all tonight. Until these initiatives are finalized, any development should be evaluated in relation to existing zoning and bylaws. In other words, proposals to deviate substantially from existing zoning and bylaws, such as the subject development, should be denied. The City of Kingston recently made changes to setback requirements to curtail somewhat the size of additions to residential homes. This is in response to concerns raised by residents about monster additions. The subject proposal asks the city to now go in the opposite direction, it seems. In the rationale for subject development, reference is made to nearby developments of Collingwood Street and Cooper Street as precedent for 218 Albert Street property. It follows that if approval is granted for the 218 Albert Street proposal, the City of Kingston Planning Committee has set a precedent for demolition of houses in Sydenham District. This is how infill and densification will take place in Sydenham District, with a wrecking ball to fine homes. Notably, the fine home that is the subject or the object of the subject proposal was the long-term residence of a Kingstonian with a national and international reputation and a key part of the streetscape. Attached, and I'll come to that in a second, is a summary I have prepared of the Queen's Campus Master Plan 2014, which plan, in my opinion, is a valuable aid in assessing the 218 Albert Street development. I believe that the 218 Albert Street development is not the type of development that is supported by the Queen's Campus Master Plan. While the planning discipline is guided by numerous objective standards, example setbacks, heights, square footage, etc., subjectivity weighs heavily and oftentimes trumps these objective standards. Looking at the 218 Albert Street development subjectively and asking myself, would I want this complex built in my neighborhood next to me? I would quickly express my dismay at having such a large complex overshadowing my home and changing the character and feel of the neighborhood. I'd like to return now to what I was saying earlier about the Queen's Campus Master Plan, because there are items in that campus master plan that I think would be helpful to the Planning Committee in assessing this proposal. Is it possible to flip that attachment up on the, is it up there now? Oh, very good. Okay, so it's important to look at this master plan. The university retained a team of experienced consultants led by Urban Strategies Incorporated with a range of skills and expertise to assist the university in the project. Regular meetings with the Campus Master Plan Advisory Committee, consisting of representation from faculty, staff, students, community, and alumni, ensured that the plan evolved in alignment with broader university objectives and responded to the needs of all users of the Queen's campus. A comprehensive consultation program consisting of community events and multiple opportunities for dialogue online was developed to ensure the plan was developed in a collaborative manner with Queen's faculty, staff, students, Kingston residents, city staff and officials, and other interested parties. I'd like to draw your attention now to the bottom piece there about executive summary at page Roman numeral 10, heritage. And the campus master plan makes reference to the historic nature of the main campus. And they talk about classifications of buildings. And at the very bottom here, I point out the first category, historic, illustrates buildings with either an individual historic significance or that strongly contributes to a historical landscape. And I propose that I put to you that that's the nature of the building on Albert Street, 218. It strongly contributes to a historic landscape. You look on the City of Kingston website, it's the historic City of Kingston. And so while this is not a heritage building, it strongly contributes to a historic landscape in my view.
30 seconds.
Sorry?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Thank you.
Well, I could leave this master campus plan with you. Areas for preservation and modest change are areas of stability, such as the city's residential neighborhoods. If new development is located adjacent to or within it, I think I'm going to stop. Yeah, I think there's just too much to go through. You'll have the campus master plan, and it'll speak against this development.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And if I believe you've left a copy with the planner, so that will be, or leave it with the clerk, and that will be recognized as an official submission.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to speak, is that?
Absolutely.
Okay. My name is Walmsley. I live on 239 Albert Street. I am up about 5 or 6 houses on the opposite side of the street, so I've looked at the subject property daily for the past 20 plus years. So I have a bit of a perspective. I won't go, this will be more of just a personal comment. I'm not in support of the development. Some of the written submissions I've seen go through some of the technical issues, which I agree with. But I'm going to say, just from a personal point of view, I live on the street. I live on quite an old house on the street, and I've been subject to neighboring houses that have been previously approved to have additions on the back that really block out my sunlight, directly adversely affect my enjoyment of my property. Remaining areas are parking lots covered in gravel, snow plows, taking out my fences. It's a significant impact on people who live in these neighborhoods to have this kind of thing, a significant enlargement, or these monster additions occurring. It really has an effect on the few remaining people who've living on the street. And the proponent put up some pictures of some of the neighboring houses and the ones across the street. In fact, are examples of some of the worst extensions and additions that have been allowed to happen on the street. Large brick additions put on the back, garbage everywhere, too much density. The front facades are sort of there in some of those places, but it's really been a detraction from the rest of the street. I'll speak to the historic character of the street. This is, from a very personal point of view, it's a stable neighborhood. Much of it has been there for 100 years. The houses in question, my house and a number of others, have been there probably 140 years or more. It is an old street. So it's really quite stable. There's relatively few new places on it. The house in question is one of a pair of beautiful wooden houses at the lower end of the street. It's an identical house to another one, and it's really a gem of the street. It really would be sad to see such a building disappear. So I really just want to emphasize that aside from the turning it into a 3-family dwelling, making allowances for exceptions for the side yard, front yard, and backyard, which don't seem to make sense to me in that neighborhood. It's yet another example of the corrosive nature of these kind of developments and expansions that really sort of tear apart this neighborhood. When I moved in, it was probably 80% permanent family residents on the street and the rest rental, student rental typically. It's more than inverted. The neighborhood is under huge stress from that imbalance. And it really has turned what was the widest, tree-lined, beautiful house street into one that's really under pressure. And this kind of an example would set the precedent for someone like me. I've got a large lot. Why don't I tear my house down, put in an identical proposal, and put in a three-unit thing on it? Well, this would be the shoe in the door for someone like me to do that. I've got the lot's big enough, I could do that. But it would be tearing down yet another house on the street that really is part of the fabric. So I just want to reinforce from a very personal perspective, it does make a difference. You know, the facade on this house looks reasonable. It doesn't quite fit in with the neighborhood, but it really, the kind of enlargement and intensification and that density to sort of bit by bit bite away at these neighborhoods until there's not much left. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, if you want to step up to a mic. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. My name is Chris West. I'm at 208 Albert. That's 2 to the south of the proponent project. My family has been there since 1966. I'm the second generation of ownership. That's long enough that I have to confess some cynicism about the way things have evolved in that neighborhood. But this proposed project kind of takes the cake. It's quite shocking. The reasons have been stated obliquely or fairly directly by some of the previous speakers, but just to underscore it, we have to remind ourselves of what makes a neighborhood a neighborhood. And in this case, the history, the streetscape, the charm, the memories of beautiful old homes. The subject property at 218 Albert Street was built in the 1870s. The same builder in the 1870s built my home. They're twins. They have different cladding. They look different on the exterior, but they're actually the same. And they're charming on the inside and on the out. And I would oppose previous comments that there's been an effort to integrate the plans for the new structure harmoniously into the built streetscape. It's a utilitarian box with minimal adornment, trying to replace something with character, proportion, charm, harmony with a neighborhood. When you rip out the character of a neighborhood, home by home, there's a tipping point, and the previous speaker referred to, there have been some atrocities in the near neighborhood, but that block that we're talking about still has integrity, it still has charm, it's still quite lovely, it's attractive to the students. They want to be on a street like that. It has the highest rents, there's a reason for that, as well as its proximity to Queens. It's still attractive to, believe it or not, to the last holdouts, the family residents in the neighborhood. But I'm not really speaking for us. We may be the last of the Mohicans, and in a generation from now, it may be all student housing. But the arguments still apply. What makes a neighborhood when you rip out a perfectly beautiful, charming home with integrity that fits into that neighborhood? This new structure fits in a utilitarian way only. Apart from that, it's really a colossal mistake. It's an error of judgment. It's an error of sociability, of culture, of community. I don't have any questions. That's my comment. I'm opposed to the project. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Any other member of the public wish to speak? I believe, Carl, were you?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Carl Bray. I'm a professional planning consultant. I'm also acting on behalf of my mother-in-law, Margaret Gibson, who lives at 151 Union Street West, just around the corner. A couple of questions, or actually a couple of comments here. I do a lot of work in neighborhoods all over Ontario, and it's very clear in the provincial policy statement and in OMB decisions that intensification isn't appropriate everywhere. In fact, best practices in planning place intensification at the edges of neighborhoods, more adjacent to transit along major routes. And that is pretty commonplace in most of the official plans I'm familiar with. On top of that, there is this thing called sense of place and fabric. And this is an instance, particularly when you have a pair of houses built by the same builder. You also have a streetscape that has permeability, visual permeability, where you have generous side yards, you have a lot of trees in rear yards. There's a distinct character to this mature neighborhood. And this type of infill is completely counter to that type of character. So you may say character is a rather subjective aspect. I don't think so. Talk to any real estate agent, and I think you'll find a different opinion. Certainly in standard planning practice, the point being is you try to reinforce stable neighborhoods, you try to place development where it's most appropriately placed, and you certainly do not want to induce the tipping point that the previous speaker just mentioned. So a couple of quick things to keep in mind. Kingston's population is proposed to peak in the not too distant future and remain stable. Similarly, the university is trying very hard to accommodate accommodation on campus rather than spread it into the neighborhoods. And the students that I teach as an adjunct professor, they don't necessarily want to live in the type of thing that this is being proposed to be built. They appreciate older buildings. They appreciate also the ability to get away from campus and have a little respite from what's happening in and around campus. They also don't tend to own cars. So there are a number of different things that are trending that I don't see this particular type of development working towards. So in summary, I think this is premature based on the growth strategy. It is spot zoning. It could be crudely called neighborhood busting. And it is definitely not the sort of thing that most communities are trying to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be brief. Just looking at the report that's provided and referencing information provided by the fellow who provided the date on the house, comparing to his own house, which is nearby, we see that there's nothing in the agenda package concerning the date of construction of the current house on the site. So we wouldn't have known that unless the gentleman had provided it. So thank you for doing that. So my question is, why not? Why isn't that information in the report? Because it's clearly very relevant to how the process is going to unfold for this file. And my second point is, what would happen if city staff tomorrow moved to designate this 1870s house from a heritage perspective? I know that there are literally thousands of heritage properties in the Kingston area, and I've attended the Heritage Committee a number of times, and I've been learning a lot about that. And I think there's been a great deal of excellent work done by heritage staff and consultants and council supporting it on designating and listing heritage properties. I'm very far from knowledgeable about that. I'm trying to learn more. But from a heritage perspective, once this house is gone, if the project proceeds, it's gone forever. And then that sets in my view, a dangerous precedent on similar things happening to heritage assets that we can't replace once they're gone. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, I will quickly return to the horseshoe. Any comments from council members? Seeing none, this will go through a continued process. Make sure if you didn't have an opportunity to speak or something else comes to mind, please share that with our staff and make sure that you've signed up on the list so that you're recognized in the event that there is an appeal at some future date. So, great. Yes. Oh, you have some answers to give.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have any answers to give right here. I just wanted to mention to you that if you sign into the sign-in sheets, provide any written correspondence to myself, you will be noted down in the processing of the applications and provided any future notification as it relates to this project moving forward with key dates, etc. So please do feel free to reach out to me directly and sign in at the sign-in sheets at any time.
Thank you very much. That's jsands@cityofkingston.ca, I believe.
Sorry, I've got an email for city staff. It's jwsands@cityofkingston.ca.
There's too many sands that work for the city. Did the planners leave most of those work? Were there any questions that you would like to address?
Yes, so first of all, we'd just like to say thank you for everyone for coming out and providing their comments. We'll definitely be taking all of this feedback back to the applicant and again, working with city staff moving forward to help refine this proposal. Just speaking to a few of the comments, there was a lot of reference to this proposal setting precedent in the neighborhood. Planning is considered on a case-by-case basis. So just making everyone aware that it's considered case by case. Any reference to other studies would simply be just there was maybe some consistencies or similar elements. But again, we're looking at this in its own context on this site. Again, in turn to heritage, hearing a lot that there's inherent heritage value of the property. Again, in lieu of heritage designation or listing. It's somewhat limited, but we do recognize that there is, that it's valued by people in the neighborhood. In terms of location and parking, the use of bedrooms on the third floor, location of parking, I think, again, parking is sort of discouraged in the front yards, so looking to where that can reasonably be accommodated in a way that functions or is functional to users. The rear yard has been sort of common. Again, speaks to the offering of 2 spaces opposed to 3. So hearing our comments on that. The use of bedrooms on the 3rd floor, again, would be regulated by the bylaw. There was a comment about concerns that could be potentially be converted in the future, given that there's the site-specific zoning limiting it to 12 bedrooms. Any future proposal would then have to be reevaluated by staff and would come before committee again, so it could be addressed at that time. And then, again, just wanted to reiterate that in terms of the design of the building, we're working very closely with staff, going back and forth to ensure that it's compatible with the neighborhood and are open to comments and feedback from the public like we heard tonight.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, provide some response to Mr. Dixon's comments related to the heritage designation. So as Frank identified, the property is not currently listed or designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. There are two different processes that council and Heritage Kingston and staff could go through. So the first would be listing the property under it's adding it to our heritage properties register. So in order to do that, Heritage Kingston would need to be consulted on the potential listing of that property, and it's something that council would need to decide on. As far as actual designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, staff would need to be directed to complete a 906 review, so essentially do a fulsome review of the heritage features and attributes of the property and determine whether it's appropriate to designate. So again, that would be a process that would need to go through Heritage Kingston and again to council for any type of recommendation. And if it were decided to designate the property, there is a period of time where the owner could object to that designation. So there's a long process that it would need to go through in order to have that heritage protection.
And that, could it be triggered, council request that it be considered? Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, correct.
So, no further questions or comments? We'll move to the regular business, which actually has no business tonight, but so I'll call Planning Committee meeting number 05-2019 to order. Approval of an agenda with a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Osanek. Thank you, Councillor Hill. All those in favor? Carried. Confirmation of minutes from our January 24th meeting. Thank you, Councillor Hill. Thank you, Councillor Osanek. Comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Delegations none. Briefings none. Business none. Motions none. Notices of motion none. Other business none. And we did receive correspondence, and I believe there's probably some future correspondence that we've received that may not be on the list yet. Date and time of our next meeting, February 21st, 2019. So I will see you all. Yeah. I've just been reminded that despite the fact I'm flying to Dublin the next day, it is a very full agenda on that date. So we can take a look at that then. So motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Hill. We need a seconder or we're never going to get out of here. Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Carried.